All right, and there is the live. Maybe
There
I,
it is.
I accidentally did the introduction like a minute ago when I thought we might be live. But just to reiterate, in case no one saw it earlier, thank you so much for your patience and understanding and grace as we were troubleshooting some hardware issues here at the beginning. We had one colleague were fair a little bit earlier today that impacted their ability to participate in the stream, and so another colleague has stepped in to help us go live. So thank you so much for being patient with us and hanging out for an extra 10 minutes. And we're looking forward to having this conversation. My name is Michael Vaughn. I'm an adoption and education specialist here with Open LMS. I've been working with Moodle for quite some time now. I've been working with instructional technology for about 20 years at this point. And AI is a current passion of mine. I'm very interested in how we might be able to use it better, but I'm also very aware of potential drawbacks and consequences that come along with that. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Amy to do a quick introduction.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to have you all here with us today for the launch of our EdTech chats. This will be a monthly feature that Michael and I participate in. My name is Amy Tessitore, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adoption and Education and Solutions and Onboarding here at Open LMS. And like Michael, I've been in the education LMS space for quite a while, well, over a decade now. But in that time, there have been a variety of things that have come along that had caused quite a stir in the education world. The latest, of course, being ChatGPT and AI things. So I'm excited that we get to chat this out today and kind of talk a little bit more about our experiences and some of the things to kind of consider and think about. All right.
All
Michael
right,
has a little
and
presentation. They're going to bring that up in just a second here for us. That'll display. That should be coming up in about 10 seconds now. You should be able to see it.
all right, and this is going to be more of a conversation, but since AI is a relatively new topic for a lot of folks, we thought it might be helpful to start with just some common terms and ideas, some baseline level knowledge, so that we're all sort of on the same page when it comes to having this conversation. And I will say thank you again for your patience with the start, and thank you for your patience with me. I am recovering from a cold. Today's session is partially sponsored by Dayquil, so thank you to Vix for Dayquil and NyQuil as well. Also, a very big fan of that. Let's talk very briefly about what artificial intelligence is, just so that we can have a common baseline definition so that we know what we're talking about as we move into this conversation of artificial intelligence, a new technology built on that called ChatGPT, and how that might impact the world of education. So, artificial intelligence is an agent. This is the first part of the definition. A lot of times we think of programs on our devices as apps, like standalone apps. You know, if I'm on my phone, I tap, let's say, the Facebook app, that opens Facebook. It's a self contained app. But there are also programs on your devices called agents, and they are not necessarily explicit programs that you might open. They are programs that run in the background, and they typically do things like gather information or compute information for you. The example I would give is on my phone, on the lock screen, I have a little widget that tells me what the current temperature is and what the current weather conditions are. And an agent is what's running behind the scenes to go to the weather source and find that information and update it on a regular basis for me. That agent runs on a scheduled basis, but it can also run on ad hoc or instant basis whenever I open the weather app on my phone. So that agent's going to go out and get that information and bring it back to me. So AI is an agent, but more importantly, it's an AI or an agent that demonstrates some level of intelligence. In other words, it can replicate something that our brains might try and generate when we are given the same task. So that's the general idea. Is AI is an agent that demonstrates some level of intelligence that you might see come from a human. In general, how AI works is you give AI a goal, you give it a very large data set to work from, and then it will figure out the best possible solution based off of both your prompt and the data that's available to it. You can augment this a little bit further by incorporating a feedback loop. So you can provide feedback either directly as the person interacting with the artificial intelligence that's running, or you can have the AI analyze its own results and then improve how it approaches the problem or how it finds new data. And this is what we call machine learning. So when the model can learn to improve itself, when it can learn to modify itself over time, that is machine learning. So again, AI is generally you give it a task, you give it data, it figures out the best possible solution according to what you've given it. Machine learning means that it can refine its model over time based off of feedback from you or from other things. One example that I love to give here is in your email inbox, if a spam email makes it through the email filter, you can flag it as spam, and that trains the filters to go, okay, messages like this are also going to be spam. So that's an example of machine learning. AI is filtering a lot of spam and scam out of your inboxes already. But when you flag those new things, that is essentially machine learning. That is you training the model to become even better over time. There are a lot of problems and potentials that come along with AI in particular, though, especially in the world of education, and especially just in general, because we actually use AI a lot without realizing it. And part of that is when I mentioned this idea earlier of AI getting a goal and a data set and it figuring out the solution. What helps AI work really, really effectively when AI tools are very effective and efficient, it's when you give them a lot of data to work with. I've heard folks who work in the field say data beats an algorithm any day of the week. The more data an AI has access to, the better its results will be. And this is actually a big strength of artificial intelligence. AI agents are very, very good at analyzing very large data sets, which can be a bit of a struggle for humans because, quite frankly, there might just be too much information for one person to go through or even a team of people to go through. AI can process that information relatively quickly. On the flip side of that, what that means is you get some really cool experiences. And I'm going to play a short video clip that's going to run in the background here. This is the live translate feature that is in Google Translate's mobile app. So you have the option to point your camera at printed text. It will analyze the text that it is seeing. And I'm going to pause it here so you can see. So what it does is it looks at the text that the camera sees, it identifies the text, it translates that text into another language, and that overlays it as if it's part of the original image. So there's a lot of different AI forms of AI that are at work there, and it's doing all this almost in real time. So this is very impressive. So it's not just character recognition, but it's recognizing the words, recognizing the context, translating it with respect to the words and the context, and then visually overlaying it on top of the image. So because Google Translate has access to enormous stores of data, it can do this really, really quickly. So you end up with these modern day magical outputs from AI that seem very, very helpful. So that's pretty cool. On the flip side of that, though, you do end up with a more problematic element because when AI is based on these really large data sets, data very often has some level of bias associated with it because the data comes from us, we carry our own biases, and that ends up making its way into the data. The most popular example we've seen of this lately is in Florida. They were using a company that provided sentencing recommendations for defendants who have been found guilty of crimes. And what they found is that this software was recommending much harsher and longer sentences for Black defendants, even when there are white defendants who had considered or had committed similar crimes, who the white defendants had violent criminal histories or repeat offenders, but they were being referred to lower sentencing recommendations. And that's because historically there had been more severe sentencing applied to Black defendants than white defendants. That showed up in the data, that affected the models. And so the AI was recommending harsher sentences for defendants who shouldn't have received those sentences. So that bias does exist. There are also some emerging ethical dilemmas that come along with this. So while there's a lot of potential, that potential can be very problematic. So one example we would give is there's a platform called Detect that some school systems and colleges use. And what it does is it basically scans social media activity, email activity, web browsing activity of students on campus, and it tries to identify if a student intends to harm themselves or others. And you might think, oh, this might be a good thing. You could prevent a student from making a pretty severe permanent decision about their life or about the lives of others. But on the flip side, there's a very fair argument to be said that that level of surveillance is a pretty gross invasion of privacy. So it ends up being a pretty problematic situation. That brings us to ChatGPT, which has been in the news quite a bit lately. ChatGPT is a chatbot that was created by a company called Open AI. Just like Meta owns Facebook and Alphabet owns Google, OpenAI owns ChatGPT. And this is an AI chatbot. You interact with it in sort of a conversational way by typing statements or questions, and it gives you the best reply based on what you've typed. And it uses something called a large language model. So what that essentially is a form of AI. You've heard of other AI forms like language recognition. When you talk to an AI like Siri or Alexa, it's trying to recognize what you're saying, right? You have image processing, so it tries to figure out what you're looking at. What a large language model does is it analyzes these incredibly large data sets to find the frequency and distribution of connections between words. And the example I would give that I'm pulling from one of the articles we looked at was if you tell a virtual assistant, I'm trying to find a pharmacy, and it interprets that in one of two ways. So it might think that you're either saying, I'm trying to find a pharmacy, or I'm trying to find a farm of me. And what it can do with that large language model is it can look at the frequency of distribution of word relationships and realize very few people are ever saying, I'm trying to find a farm of me, but a lot of people are trying to say, I'm trying to find a pharmacy. So this must be what they're saying. Um, so this is essentially what we're talking about. ChatGPT as a chatbot uses a large language model. Uh, but in terms of where we are now, in terms of what this chatbot can do, it's been in the news in particular over the last 2.5 months. AI is really exploding back into the news scene, even though it's been around for a while. Google has released their own OpenAI ChatGPT competitor called Bard. Microsoft announced just yesterday that they have deepened their relationship with OpenAI. So they are actually going to be incorporating ChatGPT not only into the Edge browser, but also into the Bing search engine so that you can search in a more conversational type of way using AI supported responses. Uh, ChatGPT has done some really impressive things. So we've put it through its paces over the past couple of weeks. It's been able to generate a competent training course outline using two different technologies that we blended together. It has created a full 15-week academic course schedule for an intro elementary education course with a week-by-week breakdown of topics covered based simply on a course description that we gave it. It has written entire papers based around writing prompts. It even it even passed the United States medical licensing examination a couple of weeks ago. So it met the passing threshold. This is sort of like the bar exam for doctors who want to become licensed if you need an equivalent. So in the United States, if you want to become a licensed physician, this is an exam that you are going to be taking. ChatGPT, without any prior training of its models, managed to meet the passing threshold for the USMLE, which is about 60%. So that's the passing threshold for the exam without any prior training. So that's how powerful this software could be. In fact, and I think we tried to hide this a little bit in our marketing, but just to reveal it, the session description that was generated for this particular session was generated entirely by ChatGPT. So we've seen it do a lot of really, really impressive things. Like all the words that you're going to see on the screen, the full session description for this was completely written by ChatGPT. We found it strong enough that we were like, let's just run with it and see what happens. So when we look at all the things that ChatGPT can do, if we think about everything that's going on here, when we think about like it's created these outlines, it's created syllabi, it's created papers, it's created session descriptions. Amy, I think a good question to start with is how concerned should instructors be about ChatGPT with this tool being as powerful as it is?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. And I think that I approach it from the angle of not necessarily that we should be concerned, but that we should be aware and be informed. Concern really just lets us spin our wheels in a certain place, but being aware and informed gives us tools that we don't have, tools that we can use. To continue to address what's going on with ChatGPT. I think that when we're aware, it helps us to be proactive. If we know what GPT, and other AI things can do, then we can be aware. We can be proactive. We can find ways to actually incorporate those things into our courses as opposed to creating this very hard line where we say, absolutely not. I think as experienced educators, we know that when you say, you absolutely should not use this thing, everybody goes and uses that thing, right? Now they've got to try it. So if we're aware, then we can be a little more proactive. And when we're informed, it helps us to understand the value. Obviously, academic integrity is always the thing we're trying to think about. We want our learners to be able to digest the information that we've, kind of presented to them or that they've found, take that information, reorganize it, can reconstruct it and use it at an application level, use it and synthesize it in a way that's meaningful. So we're always worried that like, well, what if ChatGPT does all the work for them? And so I think that when we're informed, we can understand where there's value in things like AI. There's lots of value in things like AI in education, but ChatGPT in particular. It also helps prevent us being lured in by the snake oil salesmen of the world who are out there promising us all of these things that are going to combat chat gpt. They're going to detect it. The more informed and aware we are, the more we know that those things probably aren't going to work very well. Also, we become more aware of how our data and data that we might submit to these things that say they're going to find, AI generated content, the data that's going into them and how that could be misused. So I think overall, rather than concern, I think people in the academic world need to be informed and aware more than concerned. And I think like one of the things you and I talk about often is the approach to academic integrity. And that's that in this case, this is what people are most concerned about. Like, what if Chat GPT writes everybody's forum posts or writes all of their essays? And sure, that's definitely a concern. But you and I have talked a bit about what are the benefits of that, though? What are the benefits of being able to use something like Chat GPT in education, both from a teacher perspective and a student perspective? And I know that you've got some insights and some thoughts on ways that Chat GPT in particular can be helpful, but also we've talked a little bit about how AI can be helpful as well. So, maybe you want to share a few of those things and talk a little bit more about some of the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that segue. By the way, I saw in the comments some folks had mentioned it looked like the stream had restarted for them. So if that happens, please do refresh the page and it should come back. Again, this is being recorded, so no worries if you happen to miss part of something. But one thing that I wanted to share, I had some notes running a little bit earlier. Let me go ahead and find it here. Uh, anyway, so in terms of benefits, one thing is I do feel for faculty. I do because it feels like every year there's something else, right? There's something new. There's something else that now we have to learn and incorporate into our teaching and our learning and our instructional approaches and strategies. And it just feels very overwhelming to have to add something else to the plate. And what I think is interesting about AI is already here. We've actually been using it for a really long time to the point where I had taken some notes on what it would kind of look like to have just a basic morning with AI. And I can kind of walk you through some examples of how that might happen. So there are, let's see, these are all things that are currently possible, by the way. These are all things that can happen right now that already exist that people are already using en masse. So first, there are sleep apps that you can put on your phone or your smartwatch that will track your sleep throughout the night, like your movement, the noises you make, your breathing, things like that, and it will figure out the best possible time to wake you up in the morning. That's AI. Like it's already trying to help you wake up feeling refreshed instead of groggy. If you grab your phone off your table and you unlock it with either a fingerprint or with a face scan, that is AI. It's basically creating all these different data points on your face, sometimes hundreds or thousands of data points to verify that you are you. Even if you get, let's say, a haircut or you change your glasses, or in my case, if I grow my facial hair or shave my facial hair, that AI is still adapting to my appearance, so it knows that it's still me. You can ask a virtual assistant what your day looks like, and it'll give you like the latest weather report, what's coming up on your calendar, what your current commute time is. If you check your email, AI has already pre-filtered out spam and scams from your inbox. Again, like I mentioned earlier, as an example, you can filter those things out or train that model to be a little bit better when something slips through. When you reply to emails, it suggests responses for you, right? Especially if you're a Gmail user, you've probably seen this where you go to reply to an email, it has those pre-built responses based off of the context of the email. So these are all things that AI is already doing for us. So there's already a level of familiarity, whether we realize it or not. We might just not be calling it AI. So when I think about how we might extend that into a learning environment, I look at essentially what is the role that AI already plays in our lives, and it's really just meant to augment and enhance, right? A metaphor that I've been using with folks is, I have some bookshelves behind me, and those are IKEA bookshelves, and they were very clear in the directions that I had to use a hand screwdriver to put them together because they are like that composite wood material where it's mostly like wood chips that have been laminated together. And so if I were to use something stronger, I might actually break it. So it said, use the hand screwdriver. That said, I don't know of a single contractor out there or, you know, a carpenter or anything who would say, "No, don't use a drill when you're building furniture." You know, if you're building a deck, if you're building a house, like you would use a drill because doing all of that by hand would be just a tremendous burden. It would be a huge waste of time, a tremendous waste of effort on your part when you could be doing other things. So that's sort of why I look at AI is like how can we take AI, use it as a tool that is more meant to augment and enhance. So, to dig in some actual examples of where I could see this working well in academic environments, one strength that I found of ChatGPT in particular is it's great for like those spark writing situations. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's just hard to get started writing. Sometimes it's just hard to start your outline or start a paragraph. And ChatGPT really excels there. If I give it a prompt, it can do a pretty decent job of coming up with an outline that I can look at or a paragraph that I can look at and go, okay, how do I modify this? And by then, like I'm in it. Like I've started to get going, and I I know that some folks are hearing that and they're thinking like, well, is that plagiarism? Is that academic dishonesty to have an AI write part of your paper for you? And I would turn around and say, sometimes it's a lot easier to edit something that exists than to write something from scratch. And if we look at how we actually function in our day-to-day work, either you might be someone's boss or you might report to your boss. And so in this case, just for the folks watching, Amy's my direct supervisor. So Amy might turn to me and say, we need to write a description for this session. Can you put that together? And then I would put it together and send it to her, and she would edit it. Right. Or if I were to give that task to someone else, they would write it for me and then I would edit it. And even though I didn't write it, it doesn't mean that work wasn't done. Like I still used my time and expertise to analyze that writing, to edit it and modify it for the audience. So it really just gave me a starting point. So we actually do this all the time in our work.
Mhm.
So using ChatGPT to get started or to generate an outline, to draw some inspiration, that's essentially what we do anyway in our day-to-day work when we're trying to research things and try and get inspiration and try and find different ideas like that. So, Amy, to toss it to you in a second, are
Yeah.
there other specific ideas that you think of that could work well in an academic environment? So I know I'm speaking a bit generally right here about
Mhm.
getting started with writing rather than using it to write entire papers or things like that. But are there some other examples that came to mind for you that you really liked?
Absolutely. So one of the things you mentioned in there, like getting that spark. So Michael and I do a lot of grading. So we run courses where there's capstone projects at the end, and as any of you probably know and have experienced, after a while, you just find yourself using the same words over and over again when giving feedback, even though you're crafting individual feedback. So one of the things that I did was run some feedback prompts through ChatGPT, and this just gave me some new insight. I didn't have it necessarily craft the entire feedback response, but new words, new ways of writing things. So I wasn't reusing those tired old phrases that I use over and over again. So I think that spark is important. It gives us a perspective that we don't necessarily have. We tend to have a certain voice and a certain way that we address things and approach things. And so being able to put things into Chat GPT and just get some ideas is helpful. Other things that I've thought about, and I've kind of started to employ are things like we're going to tell my students it's okay to use Chat GPT because they're going to use it. And so if I make it something that we can collaborate on together, there's actually some value there. So one thing that I've done already is to ask students when I do the getting to know you, the introduction, the icebreaker forum, whatever it is we're starting with in a course, I ask them to, write their own the first week or do a video so that we can see them. The next week, I ask them to have Chat GPT write the introduction of them. I ask them to put in a few things, who is Amy Tessitore and what does Chat GPT say, so that we can compare the two, look at how we describe ourselves versus how Chat GPT describes itself. This also is invaluable for our learners as we're turning them out into the world and they need to write a resume. Anyone who's ever had to write a cover letter or a resume about themselves know what a struggle it is to talk about yourself, and to talk up your specific strengths or things like that. ChatGPT can really help our learners to acquire some of those life skills, acquire a voice, and start to look at some ways that they might describe themselves. Um, It's also, I've used it before to rework a couple quiz questions. I have a quiz question, like, I'd love to rework this, and I just don't have the words right now. Put that question in, some of that prompt in, and see. I actually asked the question and let ChatGPT answer me, which helped me to reposition the question because I could say, that's actually not the answer I've been looking for my students. That probably explains a few of the issues with why these essays are always written the same way. So, how do I change that and make that a stronger essay so that I'm eliciting more high level thinking from my students? This is very basic. What they produced is basically something you could memorize in the textbook, and I don't want that. So I'm able to use it to help refine what I'm putting out as well as a teacher, but inviting students to use it. I've also had students, write an essay and then run it through Chat GPT and see what it says. Sometimes you find some interesting things. Sometimes Chat GPT latches on to a thought in your prompt and it just keeps repeating that throughout. And it really wasn't the most important piece in your prompt. So those are some ways that I think that we can use it to help spark some different things. Um, my experience has been that it can produce information, but if we are asking the right questions of our learners, ChatGPT is trained on the data that it has, and it's not able to give as concrete of an example of how someone might apply something. So if I'm asking, an essay type question or something, it was not very effective at providing answers where I'm asking someone to then apply that. Show me how you would actually do that in a real world scenario. Tell me how you would apply that. And that is where ChatGPT helped spark the beginning of the conversation, but it wasn't really able to give people the high level answers that they needed to fulfill the questions that I was asking.
Yeah, and building on that, I I have found that to be a really interesting limitation of ChatGPT is that it has access to this broad range of information and it does a surprisingly good job of creating readable text based off of prompts. But the responses that it can give, especially for more subjective topics, can be very broad in nature.
Mm.
And so I say this almost as a bit of reassurance to the faculty out there who are like, well, what if people start using this to generate their papers? It will be a little obvious that it's not that great of a paper.
Yeah.
So while it's going to be readable, it will be very general. It won't cite anything in particular. And I had
Mhm.
some really interesting experiences. So on the LinkedIn chat, I'll go ahead and put something in here. I unfortunately don't have the YouTube video up, but Chris, I might be able to bother you at some point to see about pasting that into the chat for StreamYard or maybe over on YouTube as well. But I published this in a LinkedIn article a little bit earlier today where it's just the results of me asking ChatGPT to write an essay. I asked it to write an essay about the Virginia Woolf novel Jacob's Room and the themes of PTSD related to soldiers in World War One and themes within the novel. And at first glance, if you read through this 5 paragraph essay that it came up with, it's surprisingly competent. It looks like a person wrote it. It's very readable, but it does fall victim to a couple of common issues. So one is its responses tend to be pretty repetitive. There was one word that it used, I'm kind of blanking out right now, but I think it reused some form of that word about 16 times in a simple 5 paragraph essay, sometimes in consecutive sentences. So it was really obvious that it was kind of repeating things. And not only that, it kept things a bit general. So even though Jacob's Room is largely narrated from the perspectives of the women in Jacob's lives, um, they are not mentioned by name at all. They're generally mentioned, but the only character that's actually mentioned is Jacob, which I think is another big tell that, if you were reading this, you might be like, I'm not sure the student actually read the novel, right? I'm not quite sure they actually read the novel. And there were no citations, no in-text citations, no citations to support arguments made external to the paper. For example, if there was a line in there about how many soldiers who returned from World War One experienced PTSD in some way, shape, or form, I would expect an external citation to support that claim. And there's nothing along those lines. So the way that I've heard this described is yes, it is readable, but it's also a really good example of like a BS paper that your students might turn in. So I don't want anyone to worry that like this is immediately going to replace all the writing and this is only what students are going to be turning in. It's going to be obvious that it's not that great a quality work. Now, having said that, Where ChatGPT really excelled was when I modified the prompt and I said, instead of writing a 5-paragraph essay, I said, write an outline for a 5-paragraph essay. And it outlined paragraph by paragraph, like each argument to be made, and ideas for supporting it and things like that. Again, no citations, no specific mentions of specific characters, but it was enough of an outline to go off of to actually write things. And I thought that that was kind of interesting. So there's always a little bit of a double-edged sword here
Mhm.
when it comes to this, because while it might not be very useful, I think, for writing full-blown papers, it is actually really useful for helping formulate arguments and outlines for academic work. And I recognize that there are some consequences that come along with that, and that not every instructor would feel comfortable with that sort of an approach. Um, so I think, to try and build a little bit of a segue here, I think it does raise a bit of a double-edged sword type of situation, because there are obviously drawbacks that come along with this technology, and there are some ethical concerns that come along with interacting with this technology. Because the more I, as an instructor, you were giving examples of putting in quiz questions to help reformulate those to generate prompts and discussion ideas for topics. The more data we feed, the better the model gets. But at the end of the day, we are also training the model in a form of unpaid labor. So we are making someone else's platform better by interacting with it, and that is not compensated in any way, shape, or form. These models are largely being developed by corporate entities. The idea is that they will eventually generate money through their use. As an example, I mentioned OpenAI now has a partnership with Microsoft, and they're going to deepen that relationship. Obviously, that's a financial relationship and not just intellectual property. Uh, so there are some questions about what are the ethics of AI extending beyond, I think, cheating or plagiarism or academic integrity, that go into who is creating uh, the content, who is refining the model. I know that you had mentioned in our research that a lot of these models were actually developed by underpaid and exploited workers
Right.
outside the US,
Mhm.
by companies that might largely be based in the US, who did that because they knew that they could underpay and overwork the folks who
Mhm.
were building these models. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on some of the other ethical concerns that come along with AI models and platforms like this that go beyond the academic integrity scope.
Yeah, there are a lot of things, and one of the more concerning things right now related to AI is actually related to sexual exploitation. And hopefully we're not flagged and taken down for this, but it is something that I think we need to be aware of, is that in terms of AI, really there aren't boundaries right now for how people can use it. We can use AI for a variety of things. So ChatGPT is one example, but to take it back to a very old school example, back in the day, we had Clippy in our Microsoft office, and Clippy used to give us some suggestions to things. That was AI in its infancy, the very beginning of it. Now we use things like Grammarly, and actually, Grammarly is required by many institutions. My own institution, where I'm completing my doctoral studies, I am required to have Grammarly and use it on my papers. That's AI. So we are using it. Um, I don't know that using Grammarly has necessarily um, diminished my capacity to grammar check or to apply those skills or grow those skills. Sometimes it suggests things that I absolutely object to. So it's not always accurate. That's one example. But when we get into things like, doing deep fakes, we've seen tons of these over the past year, both in terms of, concerning people being exploited in a variety of ways. We've seen it in terms of political places too, where there have been deep fakes created in Zoom instances, for example, where someone thought that they were meeting with the leader of a country and they weren't. It was actually a deep fake that they were interacting with, fed by AI. The conversation was completely driven by an AI engine in the background.
And do you
Partway
mind if
through,
I hop in just really
yes,
quickly?
go right
Just for
ahead.
folks who are not familiar with the term, deepfake technology essentially takes someone's face and layers it over top of someone else's. So a really common example that you can find on YouTube is, there was the comedian Jordan Peele, who is doing his impersonation of former President Barack Obama, but he looks like Obama in the video. It looks like Obama is speaking, even though it's Jordan Peele speaking. So this is the idea:
Yeah,
is you are taking someone's likeness and putting it over top of someone else's and making it appear as if you are them, or as
exactly.
if the person in the video is them. So I just wanted to make sure there was a common definition out there in case you haven't heard the term before.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Definitely should have addressed that. I think there's probably a lot of people who don't know a lot about deepfakes. We're seeing it very frequently. It makes it very difficult for us to determine what is and is not real and accurate. And some of the other concerns that I have with this technology is the amount of data and information you're putting in, your personal information. So one example is if you're out on TikTok right now, there is this like AI thing where you can do, it reads your face and then it gives you like what you look like as like a Viking or this or that. That is taking your face and all of the data points associated with it, like you do with your facial, unlocking your phone with your face, all of those biometric pieces and feeding it into an AI engine. That is your data going in there. Similarly, when we're putting things into things like ChatGPT, we're putting our data, we're putting information in there, and we're choosing to train that model. So we're letting it become stronger, even if we're kind of objecting to its use. I did see in the comments, Josh Manders posted in there and said that he found that the more strings, the more prompts that you can put into ChatGPT, the higher the quality of the information coming out. So the more we're putting in, the more we're feeding the model. But that also kind of speaks to the idea that if a student is a weak student, one who really doesn't understand the information, the prompts they put into something like ChatGPT are not going to be great. They're not going to get great output. Bad data in, bad data out. But I think there are a number of ethical concerns. We have spent a lot of time over the last 5 years, I would say, really telling people protect your data, be cautious about your data. Don't give that information away for free. Don't give a thumbs up where your thumbs are pointing out because people can grab your fingerprints. All of these things. And then we're turning around and feeding it back into these AI engines, not just ChatGPT. Grammarly is a great example. Every paper that Grammarly is scanning, where is that data going? Where is that being stored? We think about this. Michael and I talk about that a lot. This a lot, kind of behind the scenes in our offline chat when we talk about things like plagiarism tools, collecting all of that data and bringing it in and centralizing it in their own data warehouses and storing that. That's all someone else's work that's been produced. Um, so there are a lot of concerns out there in terms of overall use and then the ethical piece, the deep fake piece, the sexual exploitation, the fact that we can misrepresent a lot of things. One of the things that you said, Michael, is the bias piece. So data going into ChatGPT is going to be data coming out. And if you had a large collective, and we have seen a lot of concern over propaganda and election interference and things like that throughout the world. If there was a group who was so inclined to skew the results coming out of ChatGPT and they went in force and started to put in bad data, biased data, skewed data, we could see that coming back out again. The problem is that people tend to take AI generated information as the truth, right? Well, ChatGPT said it, so that must be true. And I've been seeing our colleague Chris post here along in the chat here, talking about some things that he's put in the errors, the erroneous data he's gotten back out. But the problem is that there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes for people who are using these engines, and they think that what's coming out is the truth, and that may not be so. And I think that's probably one of, in terms of what I think about, that's in my top three for ethical concerns.
Yeah, and even building on that, when it comes to the training of the models, I think you bringing up the idea of like how we've reinforced for people over the past several years, like protect your data, preserve your privacy, make sure you know what you're sharing with who and where it goes after that. We've even seen the emergence of, oh gosh, I cannot remember the European laws that went into place, and it's just on the tip of my brain.
Oh,
But all these
GDPR.
GDPR, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we've had all these laws and provisions and things like that saying privacy, privacy, and now these models really thrive when human beings interact with them. And it does raise interesting questions, like we've seen in the past with plagiarism detection software, which is that plagiarism detection software becomes better when its repositories are larger, but is it our place to volunteer our students' intellectual property to those models
Mhm.
as a default part of the service to opt them into that? So some schools actually do opt it in, where a student submits a paper to a plagiarism detection service, and it goes into their repository pretty much permanently to compare against other papers for other students at other schools when they're submitted. And sometimes these models actually don't ask permission. There's a really popular iOS app that kind of exploded in popularity, I think in late November, early December, called Lensa, Lensa. And this is an app that uses AI technology to take pictures of you that you share with the app and generate these artistic avatars of yourself for them. And they say in the app that they're going to delete your photos, that they won't store them, right? And I believe that's true. I do, but the reason they delete the photos is they don't need them, right? When they analyze your photos, that's the data that they get to keep. They get to keep the metadata related to the photos. So when they scan your photos, they scan your face, they scan your likeness. That is what goes into train the model. They don't need the image anymore after that because they've already done it. It's sort of like if someone gives you a Xeroxed copy of a handout and you read through it and you're like, okay, I've got it. And then you recycle it. It's the same idea. So lenses also come under fire because the artistic models that they generate, the avatars that they generate, were trained using intellectual property from artists who did not give their consent for their art to be used to train those models. So this becomes a really interesting copyright intellectual property issue because if you are in the world of arts, it takes a really long time to develop your own unique artistic style. It can take time to refine your techniques and a look that is uniquely yours and a vibe that is uniquely yours. And then AI comes along, scans it all, and then can automatically regenerate those things as a sort of parody. And I would also be rightfully upset if that were the case. So I know we sometimes talk about our high level science classes that would be affected by this. It is literally any discipline could see AI being used along these lines. So I think it does raise some really interesting ethical concerns that I don't think have been fully discussed just yet. And I will say, just so that we're being above board, Lensa has denied these claims. But there are artists who are showing pretty convincing evidence that their work was used to train the model and also that they did not provide any consent for their work to be used to train that model. So just something to keep in mind. There was even something similar the other day because voice recognition and artificial intelligence voices are also another form of AI. Apple entered into a partnership with Spotify. Spotify had bought out this small company of audiobooks. And so now essentially all the voice actors who voiced those audiobooks for that company that Spotify now owns, their voice is now being used to train Apple's AI voice models. And they are not receiving any additional compensation. So this is another emerging issue that's coming up with AI, like how these models get trained. They get trained with lots of data. Where does the data come from? And are the people who create that data being properly compensated for their work? And what does that actually look like? So it's
Yeah,
created a lot of new and challenging issues that need to be discussed. I would say if you teach like business ethics, you have plenty of material for the next several years just on AI.
absolutely. And that brings up a good point. So, over the past year, if you've been in a meeting with me, you may have seen my AI note taker join our meeting. It's called Fireflies AI. And I typically will introduce the note taker. Often I will let people know if you're uncomfortable with it being in here, let me know. We can kick it out. But if I ever forget and you're on a meeting with me, you don't want it in there, let me know. But this is something that I, I weighed heavily before using. So my concern was what data is going in and using this as something when I meet with clients or others, people that we're mentoring or whatever. Um, what is the benefit here and what could the risks be? And I use this AI note taker because often when I'm in a meeting, I'm trying to take notes on paper and then I will go to engage in the conversation. And then when I come back, I have all these like half thoughts written down and they're not great when I need to follow up with people because, if you're going meeting to meeting to meeting and you don't have time in between to sort of summarize things. And then my Fireflies, it actually takes a recording of my meeting, transcribes that recording into a transcript for me, and then it does a summary where it hits like the most important things we discussed or follow up items. Typically, though, that's wildly inaccurate about like what I need to follow up on or what is summarized. But it's been very helpful for me to be able to go back and call on those notes if I have something that's sort of like half baked. But the flip side to that is knowing that all that data is going somewhere and it's being captured for something. We work in learning management system industry. A lot of what we're talking about is specific to a client's use of a site. So, to what degree do I want that information stored? And where is that information going? So, I am more cautiously using my Fireflies AI, I think, as time goes on. Um, and also making sure that people know that we can kick it out of the meeting at any time. But I think that basically what that shows us is that for any of these things, whether it's ChatGPT or these other AI engines that we're looking at, Grammarly, Fireflies, there are a number of video editing ones that are wonderful and they're super helpful if you're producing a lot of video for things. They all have benefits, but there are drawbacks. And beyond the drawbacks, though, there are wider concerns. And those concerns really involve what's happening to that data, where is that data going, and do we have consent for use of that data? So I mentioned before that I will have students give me their icebreaker and then run one through ChatGPT. There is a disclaimer that goes with that. So they are told that they do not have to participate in that ChatGPT exercise. It is completely up to them. I encourage them all to go out and look at how that data might be being used. If a student elects not to participate and use ChatGPT, I ask one thing of them, which is to share one reason why they think that why they decided not to do that. So there has been incredible conversation generated amongst my learners about what things made them not want to use Chat GPT. For some, it was just a total distrust of where their data goes. For others, it was not wanting to feed that model, feeling that nothing could represent them better than themselves and represent what they were thinking better than themselves. Chat GPT wasn't going to do that. But I do try to engage learners in um, researching this on their own. If nothing else comes from ChatGPT, um, there's the awareness and there's our it's a door open for us to engage learners in understanding what AI is, how it can be used, how models are trained, and what the ethical considerations around that are. And so I think it's a good place to, even if we're not encouraging them to use it and we're trying to discourage them, I think opening that door so that people learn to do their own research about AI related things is the important takeaway from using ChatGPT.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've talked a lot about some of the implications and the potential downsides there. I do think that AI, since it's already here, it's already established in a lot of little facets in our day to day lives. It is going to be a more persistent thing that's going to show up in more and more places in education. And there are some ways that we're already using it without realizing it. For example, one thing that I love about AI is it has dramatically expanded the amount of captioning that we see on videos now because it can automatically caption many videos. And are those auto captions perfect? No, but it can typically develop a transcript that the person who published the video can then go in and edit. And it's much easier to edit in that case than to come up with something brand new, especially if it's like this, a conversation that's a bit more off the cuff. I mean, obviously, we have our own discussion prompts that we talked about ahead of time and an overall structure that we wanted to try and follow. But what we're saying now is not pre-scripted. So when I think about the automatic captioning, that's a really beneficial thing that saves us a lot of time in terms of transcribing and also provides more access to folks who may not be able to hear very well, if at all. There are other really impressive apps out there. I love an app called Seeing AI from Microsoft that can try and identify objects that it's looking at, or the value of dollar bills that you're holding in your hand, or it can read menus or text to whoever's using the app. There's a really cool use of AI that I love from a North Carolina company called Sportgate. It's GAIT. And what I want you to understand is concussions are unfortunately and alarmingly frequent among student athletes. And it can take up to 45 to 90 minutes to diagnose a concussion using traditional methods. One popular test that's used to try and figure out if a student athlete might have a concussion is a gait test. So you basically have them walk while you watch them walk, and you look to see if they wobble a little bit or if they seem to be a little off balance. So what Sportgate does is they have to wear bracelets on their wrists and their ankles and they walk, and it picks up tens of thousands of data points about their gait to find even the most minute shifts that might be off base. And it can suggest a likelihood that that student has sustained a concussion within about 2 to 3 minutes instead of 45 to 90. So you get immediate diagnostic information. It's still the same test, it's just better data provided through the use of AI to augment that test. And I think that those are some really interesting examples. Even ChatGPT, I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but you could use ChatGPT as a student to say, I have an interview for let's say a Fulbright scholarship with this particular academic focus, generate 10 interview questions that you think they might ask me. And it can do that. It could do things like that. So you could do interview prep. You could do, I'm looking at some of our notes here. You could ask for help, like outlining a research paper or generating research questions that you might want to write your paper around, right? It's a great first step tool. So I would say we're kind of in that interesting spot where it's not a full-throated endorsement to say, hey, go out and use this tool, but obviously with caution. But there is some potential there, and I do think it's worth taking a closer look, at least on your own, to see if this is something that you think you might be able to incorporate into your teaching and learning. So with that in mind, we're coming up on time. Amy, I wanted to toss it over to you, see if you had any final thoughts to share.
No, no, nothing really. I just think that this has been a really informational conversation that we've had here. Michael and I have learned a lot along the way, just in our own experience, but also getting to talk it out and reading your comments as well, and how you all have been engaging with ChatGPT. That is pretty cool as well. The different thoughts there. Examples of getting students to practice debating with ChatGPT to improve their debate skills and a lot of other things. But I think we all can see that there are things we really want to like, but we also are well aware that there are a lot of concerns, obviously, academic integrity, ethics overall, how the model is trained, the data it puts out, and whether or not it degrades our learners' skills in a variety of areas. But I think we also identified some really positive things and positive ways we could use ChatGPT and positive ways that AI is being used, such as concussion detection. Michael and I were talking a bit yesterday about whether or not that same type of technology, gait awareness technology, is being used to help people who have suffered amputations and are using prostheses and needing to rework the different muscles and strengthen muscles throughout different areas of their body to improve their gait post amputation. So there's so much out there that is positive and could be positive about AI. But I think that we all have a collective voice in also helping to make sure that we're keeping things like ChatGPT and AI honest and ethical. And that's really what our takeaway here today can be, is that both not just us, but our learners, we all have a collective responsibility here. So hopefully that is something that you all take away as well.
Cool. And again, thank you so much for being patient with the little technical snafu at the beginning. We appreciate you hanging out with us through that. And it looked like even at one point LinkedIn started the feed all over again. So you've been very patient today. The recording will go out later. And we appreciate you joining us. We're going to do these every month, just like Amy mentioned. And hopefully my voice will not be as much of a handsome baritone from a day of coughing prior to that. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a really nice rest of the day, and we'll catch up with you next month.
Bye, everybody.